folks while they're trying to fix the computer stuff here. Well, I want to thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'm just old and couldn't stay in one place for very long. But like you said, my name is Kevin Magnuson. I've been an assistant Washington County attorney for a little over a year. Anybody know Pete Orput here? Yeah, how can you not, right? Pete's one of the greatest guys on the planet, and probably the only person that could get me to leave private practice after 20 years to go work for the county. He said, they won't pay you enough to keep you in decent cigars, but it's a good life. And I love the work. We've got great commissioners. One of my favorites is here today, so good to see you, Mr. Kowalski. On the way over, I was talking to this guy. I was telling him about this lawyer that he knew who was driving along, and he saw this guy eating grass. So he stopped his car and rolled down the window and said, hey, come here. What are you doing? I said, well, I'm eating grass. I said, why? Well, I'm starving to death. And the lawyer's like, well, for crying out loud, get in the car. Let me take care of you. He's like, well, I got my wife and kid. No, bring them all. Everybody, get in the car. So the whole family piles into the car, and they drive up to this huge mansion, and they're looking at it, and they're like, wow. Thank you so much for bringing us here. And the lawyer said, oh, you're going to love it. The grass is knee-high. So, we lawyers have a bad reputation, but not the government lawyers, right? So now that I left private practice, I get to avoid all those kind of jokes, right? So I was also advising the county on election night, and I was there till 1 o'clock making sure everything. And at the end of it, this was our election map. So I think they're still working through that. I'm here to talk about something else. I just couldn't help it because I think that's hilarious. I wish I could say that I've got a 9-year-old, and that would be bad, and that she colors like that, and a 7-month-old, which would be, a prodigy. So I did that. No, found it on the internet. Right, so I've been asked to talk about the liability that folks like you face in this crazy time of COVID. I love the opportunity, right? This is a billboard that somebody put up. I mean, hey, it's a great time to get braces. And as a new father, it's also a great time to have an infant, 'cause you can't go anyplace, can't do anything, right? So, except the baby's kind of like a house baby, like a house cat. When he sees people, he just freaks out. When he went to Target, he was just like, he was so excited he couldn't figure out what was going on. He never leaves the house. So I got to start with fine print as a lawyer. It's part of everything we do, right? So I'm a government lawyer, and I did practice as the chair said. Frank said that I spent 20 years in private practice, and I did complex business litigation. So in that capacity, I actually do know something about the current topic, a modicum, as they say. But now as an assistant county attorney, this isn't my purview. So anything I say is just, it's about that, and a couple bucks will get you a cup of coffee. So we've got our standard disclaimer down here. These are my views. They don't express the views of the county attorney, any of my colleagues, any of the maintenance staff, the parking lot attendant. I mean, this is just me. So these are interesting times, and sort of got my attention. They've limited what you can do for Thanksgiving. So there's a death of a turkey that you can always commemorate here. So I don't know if the busted nut, yeah. Well, so they got served with a $7,000 fine, and I don't know if you can see it. She's up on the bar there doing shots with all the patrons there, So This is after they've been shut down. So, all right, so I'm going to talk about the liability that businesses can face during this time. And, most of it's common sense, really. I mean, most of it's just applying the applicable law that you've been living with to these times. And it's not really complicated. But I'll go over some of the basics. But considering that I'm a prosecutor, at least part of the time, I'm prosecuting criminal cases, I thought, and this actually does fit into my official responsibilities, talk a little bit about the criminal liability that you and basically everybody else faces, kind of exposure we have now. So, starting back in March, and we got a bunch of executive orders, a shelter in place and that sort of thing. And so an individual who willingly violates it, I mean, it's punishable. It's a misdemeanor. It's punishable up to 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine. There have been, less than 100 of these charges. Very few of them have actually, I shouldn't say charged, arrests and tickets and things, but very few of them have actually been charged. And the vast majority of them are kind of like pile-on things where, somebody's, there was a case where some guy was in the park doing something that he shouldn't have done and freaked a bunch of people out. So they not only did they cite him for exposing himself, they also cited him for not being at home, violating the stay-in-place order. So I mean, that's kind of the world that we live in. But also as businesses, if you're if you cause, an executive order or anything to be violated, any employees or contractors or anything, that you can be fined up to $3,000 and only up to a year of prison. There's civil penalties up to $25,000 per occurrence, and you can be cited. And businesses that don't follow the guidelines and the executive orders and regulations, that sort of thing, can be shut down. I don't think I heard when we were going through the introductions that there's anyone from the bar or restaurant industry here, so we can beat up on them. I mean, it's a tough job, and it's really been tough not being able to go out. I don't know about you, but I miss going to a couple of good restaurants. But every now and then I drive by these restaurants and cars are parked, and you look in the window and they're shoulder to shoulder in there, and I just I've got an 83-year-old father that I'd rather not cause the death of, like going in there and becoming a vector for COVID. But they have been shutting down. I think there have been what did I see? There have been like 170 some cases where the Department of Health has indicated that that bars and restaurants have violated the regulations, and I think there have been 38. This is since like middle of September that have been shut down. So it does happen. I think most people do their best to follow the guidelines, and that's kind of really the bottom line is conscientious effort to follow the guidelines. Likely you'll go through life through business during this time just fine. As a lawyer, I get to go through and try to scare everybody a little bit because it is real, the consequences that happen. But most of it really is civil liability. And the sources of civil liability are also pretty obvious. I'm going to spend some time talking about employment law. I probably have more in here than I've got time for, so we might blow through that kind of fast. But then you also have potential liability from your patrons. Whether if somebody gets sick visiting your establishment or doing business with you, or let's say you're an event center, and someone has a wedding there, and then it's a super spreader wedding, and it's happened across the country that, there have been lawsuits against the owners saying that, they held themselves out as having a safe establishment, and maybe they didn't follow the guidance. I'll talk about that a little bit later. and they're open to a lawsuit. Now, the courts have not really worked through these cases yet, so we don't have a body of case law to know whether or not these cases are successful. But as you all know, I mean, it's one thing to win a case. It's another thing to spend $50,000 to win a case, And so part of the trick is, like they used to say, like, you don't want to get out of the DUI. You don't want to get stopped in the first place. It's just be careful, avoid the things that cause potential liability in general. And then I'll touch a little bit on contracts. That's a source that I think you probably see a lot of litigation about, and you have a lot of exposure as people jockey for a position, better business position, as a result of this, try to manipulate or take advantage of some of the force majeure and act of God clauses. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So these are some of the topics I'm going to hit on, and I'm probably, like I say, going to just highlight a few things rather than go through all of the slides. Obviously, just kind of being fair across the board, taking care of your workers, that sort of thing is the key here. So when it comes to health screenings, they need to be accurate. Most importantly, they need to be non-discriminatory. Whatever, you need to have a policy, develop a policy that is in keeping with the CDC and the Department of Health and those kind of guidelines, and then follow the policy. It's best to have a policy in writing on how you're going to do all this stuff, and make sure it gets out to your employees, so they have it. And then the measures that you're going to take, try to publicize those, or put them out to your employees, have it posted or something like that, so that people know what your policy is in terms of screening and some of these other areas that I'm going to hit. Privacy is a really big deal, of course, and that's attention. People want to know, oh, there was a case in my at work, and they won't tell us who's got it, but we just know somebody's got it. Well, there's competing interests here. They've got to, under the HIPAA laws and other things, they have to protect the privacy of the employee while also giving you enough information so that you can protect yourself, and tell people who should be tested or should self-quarantine. And then the how you treat your employees and compensation and that sort of thing is important. So when we're talking about the accurate screenings, basically, I think it's pretty straightforward, but just kind of understand some of these tests are limited. Can't base yourself off a test alone. That's why they do quarantining and testing at the same time often. But I can't stress the discriminatory the need to be non-discriminatory in this, to apply equally. So again, have that written policy. Be consistent. Whatever you do, don't make sort of ad hoc individual decision. Follow your policy. It's the best way to avoid a lawsuit on this basis. One thing is employee waivers and releases. They tend to generally be frowned on by the courts, especially if there's unequal bargaining power. So employers tend to typically have a lot more bargaining power than their employee, and there's a lot of fine print, sign a lot of stuff, and we always kind of joke that you can get out of almost any fine print. That's why people don't even really read them half the time. They have limited utility, but on the other hand, if you have a well-written waiver that is narrowly tailored to the situation, and someone knows that they're going to come in every day and their job is to protect themselves, and if they get sick, they're not going to sue you. And I think it's probably a good tool to have in your toolbox, a good belt and suspenders measure. So I'd say limited liability, but a limited utility, but a liability waiver or release is a good idea. This is a whole new area. What do we do with all these teleworkers? I mean, are you supposed to buy them a computer? Are you, what about the time that they spent trying to access your network to get the stuff that they need, time waiting in line for a test, is that stuff compensable? I think the best line, the best policy is, do the best you can to compensate your remote employees for the costs associated with, reasonable costs associated with working that they wouldn't incur if they were at home. Now you don't have to, buy them an internet line, or you don't have to buy them a desk necessarily, but I'd say be cognizant of the unique costs that are associated to working at home that wouldn't otherwise be there, and they wouldn't otherwise be compensated for. So you've got the COVID leave policies. The Family Medical Leave Act is the main vehicle, and you're probably all familiar with that. It applies in situations, and COVID is just now a little wrinkle on that. And then there's the Family First COVID Relief Act, which has some restrictions on and some requirements on how employees and businesses and things should operate. So that's a law to take a look at. I think most of the things we covered here generally that I'm talking about in general terms are part of that law. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but just know that those two bodies of law are out there. And you've always got disability discrimination issues if someone has a hard time with a mask, or they've got problems accessing certain services or facilities within the building because of COVID. If they feel like they've been singled out and this is an excuse to terminate them, you'll have some issues. So it's always a tough thing on how you're going to lay off employees. This is my favorite. You got all the managers here, and due to cutbacks, we're going to have to fire Dave. That's Dave right there. So again, make sure your notice obligations are prepared, and you're treating everyone equally. Documentation is always important, as it is now. And I just realized I'm going to have to flip through this really quickly here. So just training is important with high risk. Make sure that your managers know how to handle high-risk employees. Safe work environment, I think that's pretty standard, right? All the distancing stuff. You have to have a good work plan. Unless somebody thought that, I thought that was hilarious, actually. So, the basic stuff that I think people know now. And you have to have a plan for exposure. This my favorite. It's Ozzy Osbourne. For those of you, you used to be able to eat bats, I guess, without causing a pandemic. But so I'm not gonna run through this. I think the PowerPoint's going to be available if you want to look at it. So one of the questions that comes up is, and I kind of talked about it at the beginning, is tort liability, and that's can you get sued? And the fact is you can. And these are the elements, and as a lawyer I have to count myself to have to put that up. It's standard of care is the one thing that I want to point out here, and that is that there's a lot of discussion back and forth about what you have to do, what's legal, what you can be fined for not doing, but whatever is considered to be sort of the standard guidance is accepted by most people, like the CDC and the Department of Health regulations. Whether you agree with them, whether you some people don't trust the science or whatever, the fact is when someone's going to come in on a negligence claim and say, you know, I went to this business, or as an employee, I was working there, and you know, they didn't follow the guidance that's been set forth by the CDC or the Department of Health. That's going to be the standard that it'll be measured against when they're looking to see if you applied the proper standard of care. You took the proper precautions to keep your customers, your employees safe. So now there is some COVID shield legislation that's been out there in other states, in California and some others. There are a couple bills. Well, there's a House version and a Senate version that are parked in committees that didn't make it through the legislature, but they are out there. And they're, you know, they do try to include some liability limitations for businesses. But again, that is not the law yet, so there isn't a statutory shield. I'm going to talk really briefly about force majeure because people, you know, that's you may see that in your contracts where somebody says, "Look, I can't deliver because of the pandemic," and you know, the bottom line is that you know, you need to. It's not a get out of jail free card. I mean, it doesn't mean that you just stop performing. You know, there has to be an objective event. And it has to materially affect your capacity to do whatever it is that, you know, that you've contracted to do. I won't spend too much time on this other than, you know, you have to show, I mean, one of the things is you have to give written notice, typically, depending on the contractual language. And then you have to have a specific explanation of why it is that you can't fulfill your supply contract, for example, or whatever. And then you know, you also have to show that you really, you know, you attempted to mitigate that, and you tried to do a workaround. So it's not just, people can't invoke an act of God and just stop performing on their contract. And I included a sample clause that I would recommend using. I would if I were in private practice. That's what I would have used. So if you need, but if you really do, I mean, call a lawyer. I'm an assistant county attorney drawing on past experience. But you know, there are plenty of business and employment lawyers out there who know kind of how to handle this now. We've had this for several months, and I always tell my clients, especially, I did a lot of litigation, so they would come in and, you know, spend a lot of money when they could have just come in the beginning and spend a little bit of money, and I could have told them, don't do what you're going to do or you're going to get sued. But they seem to come at the end of the process and not at the beginning, unfortunately. Human nature. So that's it for my phone. I know I'm supposed to leave a little time for questions. Hopefully I'm able to do that. Yeah.
So are you seeing a lot of people turning places in? So they're doing those videos like you had up there, and they're reporting it to you guys and saying, hey, these guys are not following the rules?
Go on the internet and you can see, you know, half a dozen hotlines to the Department of Health, to you know, to OSHA, to you know, do this here. How's that? So yeah, no, there are people. I mean, it's kind of human nature. Like I said, you drive by a restaurant, you see it's jam-packed, you think, okay, the guidance is 50% of what the fire marshal says your capacity is. Gotta be more people than that. I mean, it's just human nature. I had a guy call me up and said, oh my gosh, there's gonna be a church service. You know, who do I call? I said, well, maybe talk to the minister and see what kind of arrangements they have before you call the government. You know, please don't call me. Whatever you do, that's the last thing I want to get involved in. But yeah, so there are snitches or you know, self-reporting, or I should say, you know, employees are often reporting on their employers. That's an issue. Yeah.
You talked about hierarchy of liability.
Sure.
My business is real estate development. So the development manager hires a contractor, who hires a subcontractor. And everybody has a plan. Who's any contractor that doesn't wear the mask? You know, they said they're going to distancing precautions. How does it work out for me?
It's a great question. You know, a lot of that is going to be fact specific, and you know, you're going to Typically, you're going to have, it depends on how in-depth your contracts are, but, let's say a normal contract with a independent contractor is going to, say you have to follow the applicable rules and regulations, and so, it's pretty general, but, I mean, puts them on notice that they need to know what the rules and regulations are, and they need to follow them, and if they don't, typically, in a lot of the businesses that I've seen, you require them to carry insurance and to indemnify you if they get sued and that sort of thing. So typically what will happen in a lawsuit, unfortunately, is, a plaintiff's lawyer will sue everybody up the chain, hoping that there's somebody with pockets deep enough to pay them. They get a judgment against the contractor, doesn't have any money, and then they try to get a judgment against the company that hired the contractor, and that company's broke, and then there's you, and maybe you've got some money, and so they'll fight like heck to keep you in the lawsuit. Now it's not much of a clear answer, but there's risk, and you basically mitigate that by having a good contract, and making sure that the contracts downstream also cover the kind of risk that try to mitigate that risk.
What are workers' comp ramifications if these employers are asking for
That's a good question, and I wasn't an employment lawyer, so I don't know the employment stuff inside and out. I can say that with the workers' comp, that their worker comp claims have been filed, from people working at home, and again, that is going to be fact specific, and I really don't know what the outcome has been, if they've worked through these cases yet. It takes some time, so my guess is that there probably isn't a lot of guidance. Unfortunately, my wife would probably know the answer to that because she does a lot of that kind of law. So if you wait, I can call her and get her. I usually end up asking her most of the hard questions anyhow, because she's a lot smarter than I am. So unfortunately, I can't give you a specific answer on that. All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.